Welcome everyone, my name is Limbic, and this is Starclass, the Starcraft 2 show for complete beginners. There are a ton of words and phrases in the Starcraft community that have no meaning elsewhere, and as a result, it can be kind of difficult for a new player to understand what the heck everyone's even saying. Some of them are pretty intuitive. For example, lings are zerglings, a rax is a barracks, but what is a proxy pylon? Or an 8 pool? What language is this sentence even in? Ugh. Well, in this video I'm going to define the most common words and phrases so that you will be able to actually understand all of this. If this video starts confusing you, then consider checking out my first Starclass, which is right there, which explains the very basics of this game. Alright, let's begin with the two M's. They are macro management and micromanagement. Macro and micro for short. Macro is the building of stuff. Stuff being units, production facilities, expansions, upgrades. Pretty much anything that you actually build is qualified as macro. Let's say a player starts letting their barracks remain idle, as in they're just sitting there not actually building anything. That means that their macro is probably slipping, because you generally want them to always be building stuff. And if they're not building stuff, then you're just going to end up having less units than you could have. Micro, on the other hand, is the control of the units. Some micro examples include the stutter step, where you kind of move your units back a little and then allow them to attack, and then once they're done attacking, you move them back more and then allow them to attack to try to keep from enemy units being able to just wail away on those units, while you still get to maintain almost the full damage of your units. Another example is split micro, where you kind of split your big army into small little groups, and this is usually done to mitigate the effectiveness of splash damage against them. Or of course we have the blink micro, where you pull back individual stalkers as they get wounded in order to save their lives. Next up we have PvP. Now if you thought, oh I know this one, it means player versus player, then you are wrong! That's what it means pretty much everywhere else, but in the Starcraft community, it means that one Protoss player is going to be going up against another Protoss player. TVZ, for example, means that one Terran player is going to go up against a Zerg player. OP stands for overpowered. If someone says, Protoss is OP! That means they're saying they think that the Protoss race is unfairly strong than the other two races. By the way, the phrases imba, which is short for imbalanced, and broken are pretty much synonymous with OP. UP is short for underpowered, which is the exact opposite of overpowered. A buff is when something is made more powerful than it previously was. Some examples of buffs might be increasing a unit's damage, or its movement speed, or decreasing its cost, or the time it takes to build it. A nerf is the exact opposite of a buff. So a nerf is when you take something and make it less powerful than it previously was. Another term you might hear is patch Zerg, which is, let's say Zerg was buffed in the most recent patch. That person is just saying that the only reason why this Zerg is as good as they are is because they were just recently made OP with this recent buff. And if the game were actually fair, then they would not be doing anywhere near as well. The fog of war is the mechanic that keeps players from seeing anything that they do not have vision of. So for example, you don't know exactly where or what your opponent is doing at the start of a game. This is why players need to scout their opponent to figure out what's going on. So a scout is when you send any kind of unit into the opponent's base to see exactly what they're up to. Scouts can be pretty much anything. There's worker scouts, there's things like observers, which are really good scouts because they're invisible and hard to kill. You know, even just dropping an opponent, even though you're really doing it to attack them, it's also technically scouting because you're able to see what they're doing. On that note, a map hacker is somebody who, through the means of cheating, basically removes the fog of war from themselves, so they don't have to scout their opponent to figure out exactly what they're up to, and they get to see the entire map without actually having vision of it. This, of course, gives them an enormous advantage over their opponent, and that's why it's forbidden in basically any form of civilized competition. Proxy is short for proximity. And it means that you are constructing your buildings much closer to your opponent's base than to your base. And usually you build them closer to your base so that they're easier to defend. which means that if you are placing them closer to the opponent's base, you're probably going to do something aggressive with them because you want whatever pops out of that building to arrive at the opponent's base much more quickly since they don't have to travel all the way across the map. Quite often when somebody's proxying, that means that they're going to cheese, which is basically when you try to end the game really quickly by catching your opponent off guard. Usually with cheese, it's if the defending player sees what's coming soon enough, they win. If they don't, they lose. All in is when a player either must destroy their opponent or do crazy amounts of damage, or else they will lose the game. Most cheeses are some form of all in, meaning that if the cheesing player does no damage with their cheese, they've probably lost the game. We're almost there, everyone, just a few more to go. Let's move on to all the numbers. Starting with the 8 pool. This means that a spawning pool began construction on 8 supply. Now, unfortunately, sometimes a number before the name of a building means that's the supply it was built on, but sometimes it means that's the number of buildings that you are constructing. A 4-gate example is not a gateway built on 4 supply. That would be quite difficult to do and terrible in any case. It is 4 gateways. Unfortunately, there's no clear rule to distinguish whether somebody means it was built on that supply or that's how many of those buildings are being constructed. But here's a kind of general one. If that number is less than 6, then that's how many are being constructed. If that number is 6 or greater, then that's the supply it was built on. This is not a perfect rule, but it will probably get you through most situations. Otherwise, you'll kind of just have to use your intuition. Look what is actually happening on the screen to figure out what people are actually referring to. 112233? These refer to upgrades. If a player has 1-1, that means that they have completed the +1 attack and the +1 armor upgrades for whatever their army is mainly comprised of. If they have 1-2, that means that they have completed the +1 attack and the +2 armor upgrades. You may have heard people talking about WCS points. WCS stands for the World Championship Series, which is the Starcraft tournament run by Blizzard. All year, players can compete in various tournaments, which will offer cash prizes, but also WCS points. At the end of the year, Blizzard hosts their World Championship Series tournament, and only the players who have earned the most WCS points out of everyone else in the world gets invited to this tournament. Now, why are people saying Korean all the time? It's because StarCraft 2 is especially popular in South Korea. And due to some cultural differences between there and more Western countries that are beyond the scope of this video, a lot of the best players in the world come from South Korea. In fact, the word foreigner here refers to non-Korean. That's how dominant Korean players are in terms of skill. Very, very rarely can a foreigner compete with the top-level Korean pros. APM is short for actions per minute. Generally, the player who has the more actions per minute is better, although this is definitely not any kind of very concrete rule. If somebody has 210 APM, that does not mean that they're way better than somebody who has 205 APM. It's just a general rule. Somebody who has 210 APM is probably way better than somebody who has 60 APM, if that makes any sense. And finally, we have this face. This is the Twitch emote called Kappa. It basically means I'm being sarcastic. So whenever somebody types something and then says Kappa, that means that whatever they said before was just a joke. They didn't really mean it. Also, sometimes people enjoy spamming this emote and trying to fill up the entire Twitch chat with it. This is called raising the KPM, the kappas per minute. The reasons for this are beyond human logic or understanding. Alright everyone, that was Starclass Lesson 5, where we defined the most common words and phrases used in this community. If you have any questions, please be sure to ask them in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. My name has been Limbic, and I will see you all next time.